All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the Tamer Fund for Social Ventures Portfolio Showcase on Technology and International Development. My name is Katie Neff. I am a program manager at the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise. And this is the third iteration of our portfolio showcase. Today's sector is technology and international development. And over the past summer and spring, we've covered two other sectors as we continue to highlight the wide variety of ventures that we have in the Tamer portfolio. Just for your understanding, the purpose of this aligns very much with the overarching mission of the Tamer Center, which is to educate leaders in using business tools, entrepreneurial skills, and management skills to address the social and environmental challenges that are around the world. And in that vein, we are lucky to have with us today two social entrepreneurs who are addressing social issues in a global setting, truly international organizations. So we have Mehemed Bougsea, who is a 2017 graduate of the School for International and Public Affairs. And we have Jason Friesen, who is a 2012 graduate of the Mailman School for Public Health. Mehemed co-founded and now leads Think.it, and I always say Think.IT, but got it right. And Jason co-founded and now leads Trek Medics International. Interestingly enough, Mehemed leads a for-profit and Jason leads a nonprofit, and they're both doing big things and growing rapidly. So it's a nice dynamic that we have today. So the way this will work is the first half of our session today will be me asking questions to Jason and Mehemed, and then the second half will be answering questions from you in the audience. So feel free to fill in any questions you have in the Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen at any time, and we will get to those questions in the second half of this webinar. The good thing about this is in these trying times, especially if you are currently in the US, this is a nice escape and maybe a little bit of a bright spot in this election season, just to hear from some folks that are just doing good work and can maybe give you a little bit of optimism when it feels like the pandemic and the election are just creating some stress. So hopefully you feel a little relief here today. And the last thing I will note is that this is being recorded. So if you have to leave early, you can always catch the rest of it on your own time. With that, I will stop sharing the slide. And first and foremost, I'm just going to let Jason and Mehemed introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Mehemed. We'll go alphabetically on, how did you get started with Think.it and why?
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, pleasure to, and also pleasure to be here with everybody. Well, it's a great question because I gotta say it goes back to probably my childhood. I'm not gonna give the full story now because that's gonna take a little longer, but let's just say that I think it's important to the story that I originally am from Libya. So I grew up in Libya and also Germany. I moved to Germany later. And Think.it to me, or the idea behind Think.it, has really been about connecting different worlds. And so North Africa is a place that has different access to opportunity than Germany. I got the chance myself to travel pretty much across Europe and also Central Africa by the age of 20, and I lived in Cameroon for a year. Also stopped by in the West Bank for work and then back to Berlin. And I left these experiences with a feeling of, feeling a little strange and flabbergasted by the fact that access to opportunity in today's age was not really there. And yet we had technology to actually make that happen. A bit later, I made it into SIPA for my master's. actually applied with a certain problem statement back then that described exactly this question: how can we build something that's strong enough to possibly connect an entire world, different kind of world, to opportunity through tech? And so we got started at Columbia in New York with my co-founder Amel, who's also a graduate from Barnard College. So she's Tunisian, computer scientist, and we had a third co-founder, Yosha, join us along the way. We started remotely, so we were in New York. And yeah, we asked the question, what would it take us to build something unique out of the heart of the Mediterranean? So we picked Tunisia, North Africa, as a starting point because there's a tremendous talent of young people that are, again, not really connected to the opportunity. So what would it take us to build an engineering collective that would, on the one hand, train skills and specialized capabilities, working with talent that's already there, and then on the other hand, connect it with global tech teams that are working for a better future.
Thanks, Mehemed. You've really been all over the world. Very exciting. Jason, how about you?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity and great to be here. I'm going to follow Mehemed here and give you the very, very brief summary of how this started. I'm a paramedic by training, and before I became a paramedic, I lived in Central America, so I speak Spanish, and I worked as a medic on the San Diego border with Mexico. And we used to have to go down to the border to pick up patients, Americans or Canadians even, who had been in Mexico, got sick and needed to come back. And we would always be at the border, line our ambulances up back to back with the Mexican ambulance. And when you open the back doors to exchange the patient, the American ambulance was always chock full of supplies and resources, and the Mexican ambulance didn't have nearly as much as we did. And I just got very interested in this whole idea of how do you deliver emergency services when you don't have the resources needed to do it the way we do it in the United States. And this kind of led one thing to another. I started volunteering with the Red Cross in Tijuana, started traveling again to different Latin American countries, and learned a lot about resource limited settings and the emergency services that were available, and just kind of started wondering, is there a way to do this in order to get people the help they need when they need it without a lot of money. And then I'm also on a couple disaster response teams and ended up in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. And that kind of exposed the whole thing, that even if we had filled Haiti with all the ambulances and paramedics and resources that were needed, it wouldn't have made much of a difference because, Port-au-Prince, Haiti is a city of 4.5 million people, where 70% of the population, of the urban population, is inaccessible by road. Many of them live in these hillside shanty towns, so ambulances aren't going to do much good. But it was also evident that, if you went to the hospitals were packed with people who were very sick and injured. And so despite not having a formal 911 system, there was still some kind of system working that were getting sick and injured people to the hospital. And it was evident that what was happening was this was all informally done using cell phones. And people would call, somebody they knew who had transportation. We need help here, come pick us up, and then we'll go to the hospital. And that kind of, I don't want to call it a light bulb moment because it took a little while, but eventually led us to developing a software application that would use simple SMS text messages to send out alerts and coordinate responders on their own personal phones. And it mimicked the whole point of it was to mimic the technology we were using on the ambulances to do the same. And when you talk to people about emergencies, if they haven't worked in emergency services, then immediately it becomes very chaotic in their mind. And the reality is that emergency response is actually very redundant. It's very predictable, the steps that need to happen in terms of alerting and coordinating and dispatching resources.
Yeah.
What changes is when they get on scene. So we took that workflow, put it into a very simple SMS software, and that's where it all started.
Yeah. Incredible. I wanna riff off of that real quick, and we can go Jason and then Mehemed here, which is, so you each, saw a lack of opportunity or access in your respective fields. And what I'm interested in understanding is, Jason, you went nonprofit. Mehemed, you went for profit. How did you make that decision? And also, if you can touch a little bit more on the region you chose, because Jason, I mean, you're talking a lot about your experiences in South America and the Caribbean, but that's not where you started out, I don't think, with Trek Medics International, because you're based a lot in the African region. And Mehemed, you're not, of course you've co-founded with someone from Tunisia, but there has to be some sort of dynamic there that made sense to start there. Yeah, so I'll start with you, Jason.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Our first programs were in Tanzania, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. And the way we got involved with them was kind of happenstance. I ended up living in Haiti for 2 years, and that's how we got involved there. But the Dominican Republic and Tanzania were more that they came to us. In Dominican Republic, a Peace Corps volunteer wrote us looking for an ambulance, if we could donate an ambulance. And we said, we don't have ambulances to donate, but we've got a software system that might help reduce response times. And that's how that started. And in Tanzania, from the very beginning, we started getting emails. As soon as we launched our first website, we started getting emails from different groups of people in East Africa, particularly in Tanzania, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. And so that was just, they came to us, and those were our first contacts. And when we got the opportunity to work with them, we went on it. And that's how it all started.
And can you touch a little bit on your decision to go nonprofit?
So that was more, I'll be completely honest with you, it was something we stumbled into. The way it started was when I was working, myself and another paramedic in San Diego. We were working with the Red Cross in Mexico, and we were doing training. And the company I worked for, the ambulance service, they had a bunch of EKG cardiac monitors that they wanted to donate. But they said to me that they wouldn't give them to us unless they could get a tax exempt, use them for a tax exempt write-off. And so I knew somebody who knew somebody, and they helped us set up a 501c3 so that we could take these monitors. And that's how we started nonprofit. But then the decision to stay as a nonprofit was much more deliberate. And it was because we had seen that in a lot of developing countries, the only ambulance services that existed, for-profit ambulance service that existed, were providing ambulance services to wealthy, to the upper classes. And that just didn't appeal to me. I didn't, and there's a reason for that, because those are the folks who have the money to pay. And I saw that was where we were going to get pushed if we went in that direction as a for-profit. And I frankly didn't want to be focused on building ambulance services for the wealthy classes. So almost as to be in self-protection, right? We kept with the nonprofit model, because that would not only keep us from being pushed in a certain direction, but would also justify our decision to focus on low and middle income settings.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because in a way it gave you more control over your decisions to address the real population that needed help. And I'm wondering, in contrast, Mehemed, how going for profit, if that allowed you to have control in the computer science sector. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting question. Thanks for bringing it up. It gets me back to the days when we considered that. I think in our case, what's important to note, just before explaining the for-profit one, we, on one hand, have a big vision that is connecting brilliance with opportunity, as I explained a little earlier. But on the other hand, we have, say, a mission to actually help talented minds get to a place where they can actually act upon their talent. So that means we're trying to get folks that have extremely strong problem solving, maybe mathematical capabilities, but might not have worked yet as a distributed data scientist or an engineer. So that requires a certain skill set, right? So we knew from the beginning that we have a certain specialization learning component. And on the other side, if you will, from a business model perspective, what we do is technical consulting and implementation. We actually work, we place engineers full-time in teams in a distributed fashion. They're onboarded on the project management tools, etc. So we have these two worlds. I mean, we connect worlds, but even inside we have that. And so we said, what is it that we actually want to get across to our partners or customers, if you will? We call them partners because it's important for us to operate face-to-face, but right, we needed to convince our customers. So from their perspective, top tech teams globally, New York, Boston, London, Berlin, now we work with the region, but in the beginning we convinced those because this is really where the need was, where software engineers and data scientists could not be found. And so for those, our pitch was never work with us because we do something great on a social level. That doesn't interest tech teams around there. If you want to build a top cloud DevOps pipeline, or you want to go into AI, it's great for you that you work with folks that are different from you. You would hope so, at least. But we knew that in order for us to deliver on our mission, we needed to be really, really strong on the delivering a wow experience, and being excellent on a technological level. So for us, it was just very important to talk with customers and partners, as in we are top-notch technological minds, and we have a collective that is global. And if you ask us, yes, we happen to be in North Africa. Yes, we happen to focus on markets that you have never considered, right? But on a front line, we are for-profit because we essentially, can afford to say that these folks are as good, if not better, than whoever you could work with in your market. So that was a very conscious choice for us to go for profit. What I would add now, because we're in our 4th year of operation, is that we've taken a decision to work with a nonprofit as well, which is a nonprofit arm that we started, because we realized that for the first part, which is specialization and learning, we actually, over 3 years, built something that's quite unique, and that is an understanding for what it takes to build a quite autonomous learning program for engineers, and also specifically for the region that we're operating. So North Africa, and we also look at Sub-Saharan Africa as a market, and take this out of the company, something that we have developed now as the engineering company, and actually provide this open source for free for youth folks out there that would love to by themselves get started, learn online, get to a level, participate in our soft skill and technical trainings, and then essentially have the choice whether they would like to join Think.it or other engineering companies, work remotely, but we cover these skill sets. So this is something that our nonprofit today, so almost 4 years later, is now doing in addition.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, so you're providing a better product and service, and then you're also trying to shift a system, maybe a little bit more indirectly by contributing to a nonprofit. Yeah, right. Incredible. Yeah. So all the great work you both have been doing, a pandemic hits. I'm sorry for both of you. I can only imagine what that was like. How were you impacted by the pandemic? I guess we're post the first wave, and have you had to change? Yeah, what's the life of an entrepreneur in this time? And go ahead, either one can start.
Mehemed, please go ahead.
Alrighty. Yes, so it's an excellent question, because I feel like, there's the obvious factors that everybody thinks of, and I'm just going to name them. It's like what happens to your clients, customers, market, things crashing, etc. Truth be told, in our case, that didn't happen. We are vastly working online. I just talked about the mission to also deliver on a technological end. So most of our partners were fortunate enough to be able to keep going on their product roadmaps. Also, the organizations that we've been working with on the learning end, they actually had an increased demand for more online distributed learning. The future of learning, the future of work essentially got expedited with COVID-19 in our case. And so that really was something that we did not foresee, but at the same time was something that, yeah, of course, affected us in a way where we all of a sudden had to rather deal with more demand on these things and really asking ourselves, how can we, in quite uncertain times, protect the team in the best way possible? So protecting not from a crashing market in our case, but protecting from not burning out, for instance, or protecting from not overworking yourself to an extent that you lose connection with your coworkers because everybody's forced right now to work fully in a distributed way, etc. So for us, the challenges came in rather on a team health level and more on a psychological level, where we met with leadership and we had a lot of hours and sessions, etc., to rather talk about what does this time that we live in mean for us and also for our aspirations for the future, both internally, how to set up the organization and protect everybody, but then also, and I think this is what was a little special for us, rather in terms of, given that the world looks like the way it does, and we see responses and reactions from Mother Earth, and we thoroughly believe in this, and we've done a few projects that also show the evidence of the connection between, let's say, earthly exploitation and public health pandemics that we're seeing, that rather got us to a position where we made a commitment to even more invest in utilizing our tech skills to work on projects on an environmental and then societal level. So for instance, we started new work with a foundation based in Los Angeles called XPRIZE, with partners in Switzerland and also North Africa, to help governments predict deconfinement, for instance, and actually decide whether it's safe to do that or not. So we actually did more work on that front. So this was our shift in terms of the collective saying, hey, let's consciously choose partner organizations right now where we can make a difference with tech, as before we tried to do that, but it just became more imminent.
Wow. Yeah. And it sounds like, I think, Jason, just before this was part of the conversation before we got started, actually, I mean, you had to become more choosy, which is not necessarily where everyone else was, but good for you both. And it sounds like you also decided to become more deliberate in where you wanted to put your energies to do well. Jason, yeah, you next.
Yeah, COVID has been, it's had conflicting or impacts in different ways on us. Our primary market or target partners are ambulance services, fire departments, and across the board, starting in February, you just saw all their call volume go down. It just dropped significantly, and that was because, for a number of reasons, but the same thing happened here in the U.S. was that in some places there was a spike of calls to 911 at the outset, but then you also saw these massive drops in call volume because people were locked up at home, so there weren't as many car accidents, there weren't people going out and getting drunk and in fights and all sorts of other stuff. But then on the flip side, you saw a lot of other volume go up for other programs that we had just started getting involved in. So an interesting thing about COVID is that it has really increased our presence here in the United States. And the first thing was that people started coming to us. We had a few programs in Minnesota and Washington where they were setting up resource delivery networks, right? so that community volunteers could be dispatched and deliver medications, groceries, food, do welfare checks to at-risk and vulnerable populations. And so we had a lot of what we would consider non-traditional programs getting going using our software. But then we also started getting involved in, for years, we have been trying to get involved in opioid overdose response, right? So that people, laypersons in the community who are carrying Narcan, which is, what they call the anti-overdose or the overdose antidote. For years that we've been trying to get involved in this, where you have community laypersons carrying naloxone, or also known as Narcan, but there's no way to alert them when there's an overdose. And so this actually was a real impetus for us to get these programs going, because when COVID happened and the lockdown started, AA meetings, NA meetings, all of the normal support structures that persons with opioid use disorder are dependent upon were no longer accessible. And the supply of illicit drugs was not slowing down. So we were actually, the day that Connecticut, where I'm originally from, the day that Connecticut announced their lockdown orders, I was driving home from a meeting in Hartford, Connecticut, where we had just done the final training before launching an opioid overdose response program. And before that program started, we were hoping that they would respond to 1 to 2 overdoses a week. Well, once they got started, they were doing 1 to 3 overdoses a day. And it has been like that consistently. Another program that got launched actually just in the past month was in Las Vegas with a nonprofit organization that sends community social workers, mental health counselors, to crisis counselors to domestic violence cases, and they provide support. So the police get on scene for a domestic violence call and they make an arrest. That's all they can offer in terms of support services, but there's usually a victim, more often than not a woman, who's left behind, who needs support services, whether it's mental health counseling or crisis counseling or shelter. And the police, that's not what they do. So normally they, leave them there and without much resources. But this nonprofit is working with the police in Las Vegas so that when these cases happen, this organization called SafeNest can use our software to dispatch their counselors, who can go very quickly to get on scene and begin to provide those services that the police can't. And so it's been interesting for us as well, because on top of COVID, which has had a direct impact on substance abuse as well as domestic violence, but then you can also imagine over the summer with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement that there has been a renewed focus on community policing. And for overdoses and domestic violence are two, in our opinion, two prime cases or examples of where community responders can in fact provide services that the police can't. But the police, over the years, these services have been delegated to them because funding, mental health funding has been cut. So mental health is now dealt with by the police. And
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
so these types of things is really, they've all come together and have created a real tipping point that we believe for us, and being able to be more to engage community responders, or whoever they may be, experts in the community that can respond to these incidents.
Yeah, and that's such a good segue into discussing a little bit about the social justice movement. And Mehemed, you'll have a little bit more time to think about this, because I'm going to start with Jason here. Is just talking about SafeNest, which we have provided a link to an article about Trek Medics International working with SafeNest in the chat, and also a link to a Forbes article written about Think.iT on how they're a social enterprise or a business, a for-profit business with a conscience, and both great articles to read. But I'm wondering, Jason, if you can talk a little bit more specifically about you started outside of the US, and now COVID has driven you into the US, and also sort of creating a little bit of a system to address some of these social justice challenges almost inadvertently. And if you can talk a little bit more specifically about how you are helping create support in a way that the police do not have to necessarily address areas that they're not experts in with your technology. And then Mehemed, we'll get to you on social justice as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm a little reluctant to speak on domestic violence because that is something that we've recently got involved in, and we're very, very happy that it's working well for these organizations. But personally, that's not something we set out looking to do. But I can speak more authoritatively, I suppose, on overdoses, and there's definite correlation. When I was working on the ambulance in San Diego, I responded to probably 100 opioid overdoses, and 911 back then, this was early 2000s. 911 was the only way that you could get Narcan, and that was a big problem because people. This was before there were the Good Samaritan protections, that in a sense gave, we'll say, immunity. People were afraid to call 911 to report an opioid overdose because if the police came and they found heroin or illicit drugs, then they would make an arrest. And so people didn't want to get arrested. So when they did call 911, it was often very late. And for those that we were able to save, one of the issues was that police, fire, EMS basically have three options after they have resuscitated an overdose. And those three options are take them to the emergency department, take them to jail, or kick them back on the curb. Legally, ambulances in the United States can only take you to an emergency department. So there was no option for detox. There was no option for rehab, outpatient care, anything like that. And so, 911, formal 911 responders have very limited options for getting people the care they need. And now what we're doing with these organizations in Puerto Rico, in Hartford, Indianapolis, what's happening is that because these are what are traditionally harm reduction workers or, social workers, they're able to provide services or offer services to the opioid use overdose victims that police, fire, and EMS can't, which is they can refer them to other services. They can offer them access to things that, are probably more suitable. Because if you think about someone, normally when you reverse an overdose, chances are that person is going to sign themselves out of care and leave, right?
Right. Yeah.
And we didn't have anything to offer them. But now with these harm reduction organizations, these are people with lived experience. They know these people. They work with them on a daily basis. They can get them help. They can do follow-up. They can provide other opportunities to get them into treatment that formal 911 responders can't. And so this is a real big, I think, step forward in providing more holistic care to people because the current options are limited and not adequate. So now that there's all this discussion about community policing and, what is the role of police in certain cases, and I'll just say for the record that I don't think that defunding the police is necessarily a very good idea. I think that reallocating the budget in ways that can be more holistic and comprehensive is certainly a more productive way to move forward. And we're seeing this straightforward. I mean, as the director in the Hartford program said, love it or leave it, 911 is the most guaranteed way to get the fastest help you need. And if we can work with them to provide more options, then I think that will certainly serve society in more and productive ways.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that and seeing that you're basically creating access to alternatives with your systems. So
right, I would say that these programs are augmenting the existing response infrastructure, and they're a real value add to it.
Thanks, Jason. And Mehemed, would love to hear how Think.it and living in Tunisia experiences the social justice movement that is truly global. And just a small reminder for those of you in the audience, if you have any questions that you want to ask, please put them in the Q&A box because after this question, we'll shift to that.
Thank you very much. And just wanted to say thanks, Jason, for sharing your story. It's really inspiring to listen to that. It's very different from my everyday, so really appreciate it. And I'm actually going to stay on the way you finished up, which was creating an alternative way, so to speak, or alternatives or options. And I think this is really what has been at the forefront of why we started out on this journey and how we do it as well. And before linking it perhaps to the social justice movement in the US, because I do think there is a connection, I just want to say, so in the context of North Africa or Tunisia, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's a few baseline conditions that are very different from maybe what folks are used to in the US or Western Europe, et cetera. And maybe I can mention a few. So for instance, today, out of a graduating class in computer science or software engineering of about 60 people, 58 are safely going to leave the country in Tunisia and going to quit home basically because of a lack of opportunity and good jobs in the field.
Wow.
And there's other study fields as well, but this is really something that is that stands out. The reason for this is that in a local economy, you have a lack of jobs in general, so unemployment in general is really high, but especially for certain jobs where you would say they allow a motivated, passionate young person to unleash their own potential and act upon their talent. And people feel really stuck if that is the case. And Tunisia now already is a place that stands out in terms of democratic process, etc. Yet this is really an issue, and you have that in many other places. A software engineer on average, I'm not talking about Think.it, I'm talking about the market, would earn between $300 and maybe $420 a month. That same software engineer has the talent, we believe, to, with a specialized program, be at the forefront and on a world-class level. And you all know what engineers also earn in nowadays world. And now try to put these things together, right? We are living arguably in a globalized world with a global economy where people should have access to more or less equal opportunity, you would think. Now that's not the case. So we're really starting off on different positions, and a few people have the pole position in life and they won in the wheel of luck and they have the right passport, and others don't. And this for us is how we are connected to social justice and where we said we can do something to allow people with an equal mind, because we have an equal mind and an equal soul and all of this, to partake at the same table, so to speak, and also create their own realities and their own futures through technology, sure. But this is also true for other professions. It's just a starting point for us. Mm-hmm. And so that is how we started this. And we really call it a collective, and it's a movement for us that gradually, step by step, can get us to a place where we see our own salaries rising, really have a decent living that you can have to support yourself and your families. A lot of the folks that are working at Think.it are actually supporting their family members. So that's also a different reality. If you face unemployment in the country, you're naturally, as a young person that was able to go to school or university or participates in such a learning program that we offer, you might be the only one in your family supporting the family. And you might have siblings, you might have an aunt and grandparents, etc. We have a lot of folks that are actually actively supporting their families with their salaries. So it's even more important to find a way to think about the global economy differently and structure it so that talent can shine and gets recognized and rewarded based on this, not on the color of your passport. So that's something where we feel we have already made major strides, but obviously there's a long path to come. And I think the connection to the social justice movement that we've seen in the US, I think why it's so important is because it sent vibrations around the globe. And those vibrations were also felt in North Africa. And and it reminded us as well that although we have these realities, there's people and ethnicities and minorities in North Africa, within Tunisia, within Libya, within Egypt, and so many other places. I'm just naming a few that again are also marginalized on top. And so that's something that, and mostly sub-Saharan African nationalities. I want to mention that myself. I spent quite some time in Cameroon, and I had the chance to exchange also about aspirations, let's say in a different country on the African continent, etc. And I've had the chance also to meet a lot of other nationalities in Libya, where my family lives, and also learn a bit about their realities. And the story is that tech companies in Tunisia, like the one that we are building, or Tech Collective, oftentimes they are also not the most inclusive ones, right? With regards to other nationalities and work statuses, etc. So on top of what we are doing, we're really trying to build a structure and reinvent something new that maybe introduces a new kind of passport that we will release at some point. And we already have a global compensation model that is completely irrespective of market salary, etc. It really recognizes you for your work, your expertise, your accountability that you overtake, and your cost of living, depending on the city where you're in. And it could be of any background, of any gender, of any ethnicity, of any etc. And it doesn't matter. So these are some of the steps that we're implementing as part of the collective in order to continue that larger fight for social justice, actually.
Wow. Big vision. That's incredible. Yeah. And both of you, I think, spoke to working with the existing system and how that's sounds like the first step, and then also how to, like you said, Mehemed, reinvent, or Jason, augment the way a system currently works to help to reshape it and reimagine it. We do have a question, and audience, please feel free to submit more questions, but we'll start with this first one, which actually I think it's kind of interesting because we're going to go backwards a little bit. And the question is, can you discuss how you initially funded your ventures? And I think in the article about Think.it that we provided talks a little bit about that, which I think is an interesting story. I think you both probably have quite interesting stories about how you started out getting funded. And maybe it might be interesting to hear how you initially thought about that, what actually happened, and now where you are. Because also, Jason, I don't know if you'd be willing to touch on this, but how you're thinking about your organizational model now versus when you were starting out. So like initial funding, and then how that takes shape over time.
I can go on that one.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. It's a really important one, and thanks for asking this so that we can touch on it. Very short answer. The Tamer Center actually made a big part of that possible, and this is not marketing at this point. It's true story. So we had
appreciated that.
Yes. Two grants that we managed to get in different sorts of competitions. I'm going to count the Tamer Center as a competition as well, because it was a really lengthy process. Not everybody made it. Only a small number of ventures made it. And for us, it was this one really that, on one hand, of course, provided crucial startup funding. It was, compared to, of course, the expenses that we have today, wouldn't cover much, but at that point in time, really critical for us. And in addition, we were, of course, also forced to really think through critical questions of our business and organization. And so that in turn also led us to then, let's say, have really good prep and due diligence for other impact investors that we approached later. So a year after that, we actually got our first seed round that it was about 280K euros, so a bit more than $300K. That, of course, allowed us to do much more and higher profiles, etc. I can touch on this. But the initial one was a Tamer grant, and also another grant that we received from the International House in New York. If you're familiar, they had an unemployment challenge, so innovative ways of hacking unemployment, etc. So we pitched the concept of Think.it, defended it, and then I managed to get another who was 10K grant. And so these two grants combined allowed us to feel confident to say, okay, now we book a one-way ticket to Tunisia, and now we will actually see if our hypotheses hold true and if we can get something going. And had we not had this initial kickoff funding, I mean, I don't want to say that, but I think we would have probably not taken the flight and started it.
And before we get to Jason, at what point, I mean, it's incredible that you were able to work off of 2 grants. What does that look like in terms of, you know, a lot of founders don't pay themselves at first, and yeah, how did you manage that?
Well, I think really bad food and living in a garage for so that's not,
Yeah.
it was not that dramatic, but there was, you know, a few months of that involved as well. It's for sure, I mean, it's for sure a commitment. I think you have to be privileged enough to be able to do that, first of all. I think I was very lucky during undergrad and grad school to have different kinds of scholarships that did not put me in a situation where I had a lot of loans to repay. I think that's really important to recognize, because I know a lot of other folks that are in that situation, and I feel for them, and it is something that is real. So let's not forget. At the same time, yes, we had quite a period of time where we didn't pay ourselves a salary, or like in a very modest way try to, you know, live off of some modest stipends. So we would apply for other grants, and then there was like some entrepreneurial support. So kind of trying to stay afloat for the first at least 6 months to 9 months. And then afterwards, now this is the case specific to Germany, there's a program called Exist. I think it's not limited to German nationals, but it's something that is specific to Germany. I'm just mentioning it in case someone is interested. This program allows you to receive funding for 12 months, which includes founder salaries for 12 months, and also a number of different boosts, so to speak, to your product development, marketing, etc. So that was a really critical program for us at that point again, because it allowed us to really invest in our specialization and learning program, which was very atypical for a service company that we were going to build, because we needed first to invest a lot in our curriculum, figuring out who's going to train. So we had other upfront costs that, you know, other service businesses wouldn't have. And then of course there is a difference between whether you're a product company or a service company. So if you service and you're fortunate to make revenues early on, that leaves you in a different position than if you know you have a complicated product that requires 2 to 3 years ramp up time. So I think that is also very different. But yeah, as I said, about a year later, we had this seed round. And I got to say today, because you asked the question, Katie, we are break even. So on the for-profit side, we, for now, more than 2 years, we didn't require any investment. And we are able to scale the team now organically from our revenues. We have the nonprofit side, as I said, as well, where initially we funded a few impact projects. So for the environment, for society, I can mention a few if others are interested later, with some revenues, so budget from the for-profit. So we helped ourselves do these impact projects where other people would not provide funding for. But then today, after we had first track record of showing that it's worthwhile to build these impact projects, technologically speaking, and provide this to either citizens or the environment, etc., we actually managed to convince foundations that it's worthwhile going this path with us. And so today we've also worked with a few, not yet a big number of foundations that also provided grants to our nonprofit as to build this impact tech.
Thanks, Mehemed. Yeah, congratulations on becoming break even too. I'm sure that feels nice. And I guess, you know, you get to now have an inflection point of being on the positive end of revenues. So that's exciting.
Hoping for it, yeah.
Yeah. And Jason, nonprofits, how do you do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Despite the nonprofit tax bracket or tax classification, we have to function very much like a for-profit would. And the way that this started was I spent about 2 years figuring out that nobody was going to fund this software for us. None of the international NGOs, the real big names out there that you would hope would support this, it wasn't going to happen. And so I paid out of pocket to get the source code written. And then we did family and friends fundraising for a year or two. We little by little were able to get family and private foundations to start donating to us. 10, 25, up to $50,000. Um, and then as we started getting things going and started demonstrating, that we actually had a software and that it was being used, then we were able to start getting larger funding from corporate foundations. And the first big one we got was from google.org. We, after that, got a grant from USAID through their DIV program, which I would suggest to anybody who is in social impact programs, whether for profit or nonprofit. The Development Innovation Ventures portfolio is a way to go. But software developers are not cheap, and we are a software company, and the farther along we got with our software, the more sophisticated it became, the bigger the demands were to be able to maintain that. And so we've really switched now from, we still do family and friends, and we do fundraising campaigns, but we're very much reliant on corporate foundations to get the larger grants to continue to support our software team. And it's a challenge. We're now bringing in revenue. We are signing contracts, and we're able to generate revenue. And my vision for Trek Medics would be that Trek Medics could operate as a nonprofit, similar to how a university or a nonprofit hospital would operate, where they are selling goods and services and generating revenue to cover their operating expenses, but then they have robust philanthropic arms that are raising money for, big add-ons, a new wing, or a new professorship, or whatever it may be. And that is what we're working towards. But admittedly, this is a question that we have to evaluate pretty regularly, is if you look at the potential that we believe we have and our software has in terms of its reach, and then you look at other comparable companies with technology companies with global reach, there are very few of them that are nonprofit. And the first one that comes to mind is Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is a website, right? It's not actually a technology, so to speak. There's Khan Academy. There are a couple out there, but it's tough as a nonprofit technology company to be raising the money needed, because technology is very risky, and philanthropic donors are historically risk averse. Another issue that we run into often is that a lot of times donors would like to give us funds for the programs that our software supports, but not so much for the software itself. And so that is a problem for us too, because like right now we're doing something where we're updating from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4, and that's not really an appealing thing for a donor, as opposed to saying,
Right.
we'd like to go out and train 200 responders, give them uniforms, and put your logo on it. That's something that's more traditionally what donors are giving to. So these types of things are a challenge for us, and they haven't been challenges that have stopped us, fortunately. But it is always something that we're dealing with, is the long-term horizon. What does that look like for a nonprofit technology company, and is it a viable way to continue? and so far so good. But the reality is, like any technology company, we could always use more software developers, and raising the money for that is tough. Raising money in general is tough. It doesn't matter whether you're for-profit, nonprofit, or what you're raising for. But the other thing is, the alternative being a for-profit model. Well, then you get into a whole nother bucket of issues. Is this, are you going to be able to create the returns that investors are looking for? And like I said at the outset, one of the concerns that I had at the beginning was I wasn't interested in developing, building technology or services for the wealthy. And when you take private investment, you give up that kind of autonomy to a certain extent, unless you can go into it proving that the returns are there in the way you're doing it now. And even then, if somebody sees a way that you could be making more money in a different way, then you kind of lose that autonomy. So it's just something that we're continually assessing.
I would actually jump in on this one, because I think it's really important what you say. I do believe that there's an alternative, talking about alternative option for the for-profit pathway involving investors. So I think it really depends on the degree at which you're looking for investment, and two, what kind of investors you can actually attract and line up around you as well. Because I fully agree with you that the majority out there are almost entirely profit-driven, let's face it. And there is a small portion that is, and there's more that call themselves impact investors, but there's still a smaller portion of the impact investors that are truly patient and really impact first driven, but they are out there. And I think it's worthwhile considering whether you can find individuals that connect with you, with your vision, with your unique spirit as well, and that understand why you're taking that path and where you want to go with it. And I think that was one of the reasons why our fundraising took probably about 11 months to 12 months, so quite long. We had a lot of conversations with different investors. We rejected a few. We actually rejected more than we agreed with. But 4 years in, I've never once had a situation in which I felt pressed in any way on any KPI by one of our investors. And so we were able to steer it in that direction with our very strong impact focus, and at the same time a for-profit how, so the mechanics of a for-profit company. And as I said earlier, towards the end of the third year, early fourth year, we added the nonprofit that opened us for a whole new angle of other activity and impact as well, which on a legal level aligns perfectly with the for-profit. So I'm just saying that there are different pathways. Usually you will not have a shortcut, and yes, it feels not that great to turn down an investment offer if you're fundraising and this is really what's needed, but you don't have an exact right feeling with the investor. But looking at it from today, I think it's worthwhile putting yourself through it, and rather some more difficult conversations also with your everybody who's obviously looking forward to finally having a salary or a compensation that gets you out of the garage or something. But I think it pays off in the long term. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that final note, Mehemed. I think that's a really nice place for us to wrap up. We have 1 minute left, and we had a very active participant, Alex, so thank you. And thanks for your question. This has been a fantastic session. And Jason, Mehemed, it sounds like you both have been working a lot for the past few years, and that you continue to do good things out there in the world. So thank you for taking the time today to share your experiences with hopefully some rising social entrepreneurs. A bit less than 2 years, okay. Fair enough, Mehemed. So a little bit less time for you, but I'm sure you'll be doing this as your life's work as well in some capacity. But just want to thank you both. I would like to thank Diana Rambo of the Tamer Center, who's also in the background making all this happen as well. And to those of you out there in the audience, thank you for joining us. And if you like this series, please fill out the survey, or if you don't like it and you want something else, please fill out the survey link that we provided in the chat. We would love to hear your feedback and to offer you more events that address your interests. And any final thoughts from Mehemed and Jason?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure. And feel free, if anybody has any questions or like to talk more, feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to. And thank you always to Tamer and for all the support that they've offered us over the years, because it has been a long time that you guys have been supporting us. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
I can only echo that, really. Thanks for making this happen. Thanks for the attention, taking the time to be with us. Although this is not in a physical, what would otherwise probably be more exciting setup. So thanks for staying with us. And on a more selfish note for Think.it, check out Think.it. We are looking for really brilliant folks, and we have a few open positions. So if you feel like it, then please get in touch.
Good to know. Thank you. And last but not least, I couldn't help but not put in a plug for the Capital for Good conference with the Tamer Center. The next iteration of that in our virtual series is next Friday, November 13th. So please head to the Tamer Center website to also join us for that part of the conference. And in the thank you notes that go out, we will provide further details for both Trek Medics International and Think.it. So thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.